And welcome into another episode of Hockey Royalty Live, the official podcast of hockeyroyalty.com, where we got articles flying every single day. We got a great show. Russell, the main man, the myth, the legend, coming back here. Looks like he's growing in that summer stash. How you doing, big guy?
I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, it's a good time to be a sports fan in Southern California right now. Dodgers are killing it. Kings are looking pretty good this season, and football's just around the corner. I'm wearing my Charger hat today, so I'm excited.
Nice. And Joe is scared about the olive oil shortage for that to wax that dome of his. How you doing over there? You getting through it?
I'm not good. You saw the tweet. I mean, we can't be having the price of olive oil be going through the roof and eventually losing some of the supply. That's a problem.
That is a problem. Not only for eating, but for beauty knowledge there.
Gotta stay shiny. Shiny.
So today we're talking about the World Junior Championships, first day right here for you guys on this episode, and then we're getting into the goalies, big hot topic. So stay tuned for more Kings hockey. We were gone for so long, 3 seconds, and we are back. Welcome to the chat. Get your questions going. We're excited to talk about it here today. World Junior Championship started today. A couple Kings prospects got onto the ice. 3 games. We had the Slovaks and the Czechs with a 5-4 final. Finland over Latvia 6-1, and USA over Germany 5-1. Let's nobody playing in the Czech-Slovak game for us. So let's go to the Finland game here. I brought it up. 6-1, the stats here. Our main man, Casper Simon Tyval, thought he might not make it, because the military stuff was there. Got an assist, and then Samuel Helenius with no points there. Looks like a recent draft pick, Joachim Kemmel, had a day with 2 goals, 2 assists on the day. 6-1, obviously Latvia, not a powerhouse. But Brad Lambert still showing that he's there. That was one guy that we were thinking about for the Kings. Overall, what did you guys see from the highlights on this game, and how did it turn out?
I mean, it's kind of a typical Finland type game. I mean, they're just systematic type team. They're not going to really wow you with some plays that they make, but it seems like they're always going to be at the top of the World Juniors, whether they medal. I believe they got bronze medal last go around, and Simon Tyval and Helenius were on that team. So to see them both come back, and they're going to be huge contributors for the Finnish team. Casper Simon Tyval is going to be playing top 6 minutes. Samuel Helenius is going to be leaned on the penalty kill, play some really strong minutes down the middle at a center position. So I'm excited to watch the Finnish squad. I think they're going to do pretty well in this tournament as well. And I think Casper Simon Tyval has a chance to put up quite a few points on that team.
Yeah, Finland always seems to be it, no matter what. And I think it's the fact that they grow up from such a young age playing. They all play that kind of Finnish hockey way. It seems like they can plug in any Finnish player at any time, and they know how to play Finnish hockey. Joe, what is your thought process on Finland here, and what this would mean for our 2 prospects?
Well, I think what I want to see too is these guys were in the abbreviated World Juniors before it got canceled. Finland and these 2 in particular were off to pretty good starts, Simon Tyval and Helenius. So. I'm curious to see how the rest of the tournament goes for them. I also think that, they've also gotten some time to play. Helenius particularly, obviously, a little bit got his feet wet in Ontario. So they've had a little bit more pro hockey experience, both overseas and here in the States. So I just want to see how this goes the rest of this tournament, to see if these guys can really, again, they were impact players back in the winter before it got canceled, and to see if they can really be, as Russ said, pretty big-time contributors for this team.
Yeah, we've been watching – I've been watching Casper Simon Tyval. It feels like for years now. I mean, the problem – he's probably the only prospect that I haven't really seen that I'm excited to see that hasn't been in LA yet. I mean, Kim Noisiainen finally made his journey over here from Sweden. Yep. I believe he's playing in the Swedish League or Finnish League, whatever pro league over there. But now he's over here. He was at development camp for a week, so he should be playing for Ontario Reign this coming season. So I'm excited to see what Noisiainen can bring. But now with Simon Tyval, we've only really been able to see what he's been able to do over there overseas. So anytime I get a good chance to watch Casper Simon Tyval play, I just really love watching him play. He's on the smaller end. He stands only 5'7". He weighs like 180. So I mean, he's not really that noticeable, but he's an electric player. He plays with a lot of tenacity, and he's always around the front of the net. It's really cool to watch a player of that size just have the instinct to just drive straight to the net, because that's something that the Kings have kind of lacked. I mean, there's not many players that will take the puck to the net on the Kings now that they have Kevin Fiala, who's kind of known for that too. We saw a little bit of that from Blake Lazat, Carl Grundstrom, but with Simon Tyvel, that's where he lives. So I think we'll see a lot of that this World Juniors too.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting how that team works out. The three guys there, and we're going to see Hellenius here in Ontario next season, and so it'll be interesting to see how that stems over. Get another look at him. At development camp, he wasn't one of the highlights, but I mean, it still seemed like he used his size very well. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Russell. Like he's a imposing player out there on the ice.
Oh, 100%. I mean, yeah, you look at a lot of, I mean, the Kings prospect pool right now all of a sudden has become this like redwood forest of just tall players. It's insane. Like, I mean, you have Hellenius, you have Andre Lee, you have Caleb Lawrence, you have Jack Sparks. I mean, there's just all players that are 6'5". Byfield's 6'5" too. So, I mean, it's hard to stand out when you have a lot of those players that are around the same height and you're not the only one standing that high. But Hellenius, he's a big kid too. It's not just like he's tall and lanky. He's got some strength to him. He's got a lot of power to him. And in the neutral zone, it's really hard to take him off the puck because he's willing to use a little bit of that speed that he has to drive up and down the ice. So I'm excited to see what he's able to bring in his first real pro year, I guess, with the AHL in Ontario.
With our resident expert here for Russian hockey, Pavel comes in here. Not a U20 player, but notable that Kirill Kirisanov has had the most time on ice and few assists on the Russian U25 team that's at Sochi playing against Sochi Open playing against KHL star teams. So that's good to know that he's been selected for that team, been showing up, getting a lot of time on ice. Be interesting to see when his contract is ended. I think it's one more year before he's eligible to sign in the United States, but that'll be one other guy that we're looking for to come on over. The next game here,
one of the few. Randall, one of the few left shot D that unfortunately don't get a chance to see in this tournament. Just because of the situation that's going on overseas, but certainly one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, those two. Since Russia's not in it because of the whole Ukraine-Russia thing, the Russian Hockey Federation is actually teamed up with Belarus, so they're playing. They call it the Sochi Open. So what they're doing is they put together this U25 team of all these young players. Kirsanov is on the team, and they're going against actually some of the other pro teams, the men's teams. So they're playing a lot of games. They're trying to find ways to get these young kids to play games because you have a lot of young stars over there. You have Danil Yurov, you have Miroshnichenko. So you have a lot of talent that's not being able to play in these World Juniors, which is, I mean, a fault to Russia, obviously. So, but with Kirsanov, I remember when he was drafted, I believe Yannetti said that he thought he could play in the AHL at that time. So there's a lot of potential, or the Kings have a lot of high hopes on Kirsanov. He's not the most offensively gifted player. He's kind of like a Mikey Anderson kind of mix, but he seems to be faring pretty well over there.
Yeah, it's something to see, and this guy that's just a lockdown defenseman, and you're not expecting much on the offense, and just you don't really see or hear from him. So, it's just something that is really that we're able to do there. So, moving on to the next game, no prospects, thanks to the trade for Kevin Fiala, but we are in the United States. The United States cleans up Germany 5-1. No points from Brock Faber, but just something to add. Wish the guy well. He is the captain. Got to see for the team, so that's something to look at there. But Germany, without all their star players that they had with JJ Peterka and Stutzla, really took a downgrade this season with what they are under the U20s, and USA had no problem cleaning up that game. So moving on to the opener today, Sweden plays Switzerland. Helge Grans is playing for Team Sweden and got an assist today on the first goal. It looks like to Daniel Torgerson. Also, Simon Evanson was on that for the assist. A couple of things that came out on Twitter. It looked pretty good as far as for his game. What did you guys think about his performance there today?
He's playing in all situations. They have him playing the penalty kill. They have him playing on the power play. I mean, he's playing that top pair with Simone Evanson, the Red Wings high draft pick. So that's going to be a pairing that's going to be leaned on quite a bit. And it's interesting for Helge Grans, who this is his first World Juniors. He was actually passed up, because he was on the younger side of the team going over there. But so this is his first World Juniors, his first taste. I mean, it's not this one doesn't really have the whole fanfare as much as probably the last few. I mean, you see the pictures of the crowds.
It's an understatement.
Yeah, exactly. You see the pictures of the crowds, and I don't know. It's kind of, I don't want to say it's ridiculous, but it is what it is. I guess at this point they're trying to force a tournament kind of in summer, August, in Edmonton. It's kind of difficult, but Grans looks pretty good. He looked pretty good in the first game, and I'm looking forward to see what he does in the rest of this tournament.
You know what I'm looking for here in this tournament from Grans is, he's now got a full season of AHL hockey under his belt, and you want to see how that kind of transitions now playing against, now more his peers, right? His age level, his age group, and to see how he looks now this year. And again, I know Russ, you said he only got a chance to play a game or two before the tournament shut down, but to see if he can really look like a player that is ready to lead that blue line. And you said he's playing all situations with Edmonton. It's going to be what expects to be a pretty big tournament for him. I know their schedule the first couple of games is relatively weak, but they play the States. I believe it's on Sunday night. They play the U.S. So that'll be a fun test to watch and a real fun one to see against some better competition. So
definitely.
Yeah, the game ended up, the last one here ended up against Latvia. Canada was 5-2. Canada should have won this game, did win this game. Interesting note that one of the defensemen bowed out. Brent Clark did not make the team right out of camp. Wasn't one of the guys that were brought in after the injury to one of the other defenders. Is this cause for concern for you guys? Like, he should be dominating his own age group. Is this cause for concern? Going forward as a guy that was a top 10 pick?
I wouldn't say it's cause for concern. Admittedly, I pause, right? I think it's interesting. Listen, I'm not a scout that's watched Brant Clark game in and game out. Okay. There's obviously people that have seen him a heck of a lot more than I have. And I tend to trust that Hockey Canada, who's pretty stacked, right, with options, that there's something they see in his game that isn't ready. They're trying to win a tournament. It's a short sprint tournament. It's not as if they have time to see how he can develop or adjust in a certain situation. They want a set of guys that are ready to win this tournament now. And again, they see something in his game that isn't quite ready. So it doesn't make me worried or anything like that. It gives me a little pause that my assumption would have been he would have made the team, but I'm not losing sleep that he didn't. That said, I was, and I think, Russ may have been the one to point out that, you really didn't see him, not to say you don't see him as an option, but you're not necessarily expecting him to make the NHL roster this year. And there was a point where I was like, I think he probably should at least be, it's almost his spot to lose, but maybe not. If he's not ready for Hockey Canada in the World Juniors, then what's to say he's ready to play NHL hockey in a couple of months? So that's the only thing that maybe gives me some, and again, I don't want to say concern, but I just really wish he could play in the AHL. I mean, I hate to see, the reason I would like to see him stay in the NHL or make the NHL, maybe what I was thinking at the time was I really don't want him to go back to the OHL, which I just don't know if that's a level that I don't know. Again, people are going to know a lot more than I will, but anecdotally, I'd like to think that he'd be better off in the AHL. But
yeah, I'm with you, Joe. I don't think it's necessarily a cause for concern about his potential and what he'll be in the NHL. I mean, it feels like it's a little unprecedented, I guess you can say. You're talking about probably the most prolific offensive defenseman not yet in the NHL, or still possibly even still playing in junior leagues because of the CHL AHL agreement, which just seems kind of ridiculous almost at this point. But I'm with you. Like, I wish there was still a chance to see Clark just make the jump to at least AHL hockey. Like, the fact that it's either NHL or CHL or OHL for him, it seems redundant for him to play another year in the juniors. It really does, because of how forceful he was offensively. So you would like to see that Quentin Byfield, Arthur Kaliyev, they had the escapability, I guess, to get away from the junior leagues and come to the AHL because of COVID and all that. But with Clark, I don't know. It's just it puts a stop on the momentum of all that talk of him making
Mm-hmm.
the NHL roster, I guess is what it does.
Well, the only thing that would worry me, Randon, is for a player that he was over a point a game as a defenseman in the OHL last year. I guess the only thing that would worry me is you just hope, and this just comes down to the makeup of the player. You don't want bad habits. And if you're that dominant already, that if you're going to go back for another season, that you've already dominated from an offensive standpoint, you just hope that whatever tasks he's given in terms of what he needs to work on, that he's doing that. Again, assuming it's at the OHL level rather than, again, knowing he's already the best defenseman in the league from an offensive standpoint and just doing the things he needs to do. So, but no, long term, not concerned. Didn't, but I think it does give a legitimate question as to whether or not he's somebody that's in serious consideration for the NHL this year.
I think it's just kind of it might be just down the rabbit hole for Kings fans' psyches, right? I mean, we've talked about we've talked about the prospects and the necessity that at least two of the four major ones that we have, the Byfield, Turcotte, Velarde, and Clark, two of the four need to pan out in order for the rebuild to really take that next step, right? You see it with, our neighbors down the highway there. Well, Drysdale and Zagros have had legit moments in the NHL. You see it with Colorado, like the reason that they're a juggernaut is that all their top picks have worked out to a high level. And, Bowen Byram is still just getting his feet wet, but he was noticeable in the playoffs. So, where does that eventually fit in? Is this just another Kings draft pick and that's been high that's going to disappoint fans? Are we going to have to bring in free agents where realistically our prospects should be showing out? Like obviously the Deneau signing was fantastic for the Kings, but if Velarde played well the previous year, that signing isn't made, right? And now Velarde's a trade piece. So ultimately, I think like from the fan standpoint, you're like, okay, well, here's another pick that sucks, or is never going to live up to the expectation that we taught him. Like you look at a lot of analysts would have taken him third overall, and we got him at 8, right? So it really seems to be there. I mean, not everybody who played in the World Junior has had a successful NHL career, and not everybody who hasn't made the World Junior, has been a bum. So obviously this isn't the end of his career, but from a psyche, from a fan standpoint, and wanting to have a legit prospect, like just dominate the World Junior, come in and dominate next season. Like that's what you saw from a lot of other teams, right? Like you saw, from Jamie Drysdale for Anaheim. Like he dominated World Juniors. He came in. Byfield only had one good game in the World Juniors, right? And then he had an up and down season. Is he going to be the guy? It's like this is just another person that we're looking at. Right, Turcotte had an excellent World Junior and then can't stay healthy. It's just like, when is there going to be a prospect for the Kings that just comes in and dominates from the get-go? Right, it just seems like there's a lot of speed bumps that go on, and that's what we've had to deal with.
I asked this question. Well, I've had a couple Kings fans reach out to me. It's like they have that same they echo that same sentiment. Like you have these first round picks. Like I go back to Rasmus Kupari and Gabe Velarde. I mean, they haven't really made that jump where they get into the NHL and then all of a sudden they blow it up. I mean, Velarde had those first 10 games, but then now it's been kind of up and down for him. So yeah, I'm with you. I'm waiting for this rookie to just jump in and all of a sudden explode. I mean, Sean Durzi, he had a pretty good year out of nowhere. I guess that's a decent example. I mean, he's on the older age in terms of prospect, but yeah,
but he wasn't a first round pick. Like he was the afterthought of that trade, right? Yeah. Like I guess the only person that you can really think like Kaliev was a second round pick, but he had a first round grade on every single draft book. Like he should have been drafted in the top 15, was slipped because of defensive liability. And he's been nonstop pedal to the metal since he's been drafted and proving people wrong that he should have been taken higher. I mean, I guess maybe that's the only one you see, but like there's been fault to Bjornfoot's game. Obviously Turcotte can't stay healthy. Brant Clark having missteps here, even though he had a phenomenal season last year. Gabe Velarde with the back issue, Byfield with the ankle and not dominating as a second overall pick should. So far Stützle has had a better NHL career, even though Byfield is just starting, and that was the big debate that year. So just a lot of missteps. And, I think Kings fans just want one prospect to just be like, put it on the table from the drop of the hat,
I brought up this question to Joe earlier today, and I'll bring it up to you, Randon. And this has nothing to do with what's going on with Brant Clark, that missing the Team Canada roster or whatnot. Let's say that the Kings know Durzi's going to turn out to be this kind of above average defenseman in his first year. He's looking pretty solid. Do you think they still draft Brant Clark over maybe a Jesper Wallstedt or a Sebastian Casa, the two elite goalies in that draft? Or
Well, they obviously have already documented that they tried to call like 6 or 7 guys to get Wallstedt.
Yeah,
right?
and that's kind of why I bring it up, because if they really wanted Wallstedt, they see what all us Kings fans see, that the prospect pipeline looks great in almost all areas except goaltending, which we'll probably get more into obviously later. But there isn't that elite goaltender, quote unquote. So with how much interest they had in Wallstedt and Casa or whoever at the time, I think reaching for those players at the time maybe wouldn't have been the worst thing. I mean, you think about it, like, let's say you take away Brant Clark from the Kings prospect pool and you add a Jesper Wallstedt. That's a pretty solid future you have built up in LA for hockey. I mean, you're obviously Brant Clark's still going to be an elite, I think, level defenseman, probably top pairing in the NHL, but there's a lot of talk about Wallstedt being this next Henrik Lundqvist even. So it's a question I bring up.
Yeah, I mean, you see Yannetti likes to move. He probably would have moved outside the top 10, added a second-round pick. So then you get Wallstedt and you get another second round, and you probably don't trade Brock Faber at that point. Mm-hmm. So maybe we don't get Kevin Fiala, but like, how does, maybe, or we use another pick or prospect to get Kevin Fiala. But yeah, it's interesting. Like, I was a fan, going into that draft, and we talked about it a lot. I was a fan of taking Wallstedt at 8. Mm-hmm. Like, I was like, okay, our whole prospect pool, there's no holes besides here. Like, why not get one of the best goalies that's come out of the draft in like over 2 decades? And we just saw Askarov and Spencer Knight and all these other goalies just get taken. And this guy he was the youngest player in the SHL. Like, he started playing pro hockey at 15 against men in the pipes, no less.
Yeah,
right?
better numbers in that league than Lundqvist too.
So you're looking at that. Like, then at this point, you see Spencer Knight making the league after 2 years. You see what maybe Askarov playing in the AHL at the end of last season. Will he get a chance to play for the Predators this year? Like, so, okay, if we draft Wallstedt last year and then he's ready to go NHL adjacent in 2 to 3 seasons, okay, then is he coming over from Sweden to play for the Reign next year? And then we just have to get another backup goalie for Cal for 1 season. We sign Quick to a 1-year deal, and then he rides off into the sunset, and Wallstedt and Peterson are the tandem. It would be an interesting future.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
It's definitely a fun conversation. I think at the least. I think the question that is still, it's the verdict is still out. But if particularly if Byfield and Clark struggle, because we got to remember, like, it's one thing to bash the Kings for the picks themselves, because everybody had these guys that go in there. Everybody had Byfield. It was a combination. Or is it Byfield or Stutzla? But like, it was not like a reach. Same thing with Clark. People had Clark going much higher. Turcotte was projected to be a top 5. Like, so that none of these picks were necessarily off the board. Is it because if the Kings were wrong in that selection, then shoot, every analyst is wrong in their scouting process, right? Is there the question that I have, and again, I'm not necessarily suggesting this now, it's just for down the road. If they continue to miss on these guys, is there something going wrong with the development program with the Kings? And again, I don't mean to say that in an accusatory way, but if we're being honest, if they've missed on this many top picks, that consensus, and maybe just consensus, was wrong too. Maybe these players just happened to be guys that shouldn't have gone there, and the Kings are the lucky ones to continue to make that pick. But consensus was these guys were legitimate players and legitimate talents. And again, Byfield still fully expect him to be. Same with Clark, but it's just something that's been floating around in my head the last couple of years, because you're right. I mean, there gets this little like frustration that kind of sets in at times, but we're still early days. We're still early days.
Yeah, we shouldn't wrap these prospects at all. I mean, I don't think we are. None of us are doing that.
No.
I mean, the only reason I bring up the Clark thing and Wallstedt thing is because you look at this past season, and no one really expected Dursey, let alone Jordan Spence, to make the sort of NHL impact that they have already. So now that you already had that right side of defense pipeline pretty loaded. Now you see what Jordan Spence is able to do. You saw what Sean Dursey was able to do. I mean, they shipped out Brock Faber, and there's still Gronds down there. You still have some other pieces that are available. So, I mean, it's just an interesting conversation.
Sure.
I mean, you've seen what Shesterkin and Vasilevsky have done for their teams.
Well, the one thing you got to remember, like Shesterkin's also like he's not 24, 23. Yeah. He's 26, 27 years old. He played a lot of pro years in Russia. So I think with goalies, and this is probably going to be a segue, but most of the time you're talking like 23, 24, 25 years old. I mean, the fact that, I don't know, Juho Markkanen is 20 years old and he's still over in Europe. That's okay. He's 20. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's probably a good 5 years away. Like, not to jump the gun, Rando, but I just think we need to keep in mind also that like it often will take goalies some time. Like, yes, Spencer Knight is here in the NHL, Carter Hart, but they haven't exactly gotten off the flying start. So I just think that there is some patience, and I understand the impatience and the frustration, because I do agree, Russ, that despite all that, there isn't the elite prospect. We can confidently say that. That's not to say one of these guys won't turn into a starter, but there's not, at least from a prospect standpoint, there's not that surefire, this is the guy of the future, right? You're just hoping to hit on one of a handful.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's get to our esteemed sponsor here with DraftKings. Let's pull it up here. The action never ends at DraftKings Sportsbook easily this summer with tons of ways to bet on your favorite sports. You can fuel your fandom or feel the heat of the offseason like never before. Plus, right now, DraftKings Sportsbook is giving new customers a risk-free bet up to $1,000. That's right. Make your first bet up to $1,000, and if it doesn't win, you get another shot to cash in. You can throw down on all major action for baseball, golf, MMA, and more. Plus, same-game parlays, spreads, money lines, over-unders, and props for betting making your betting options endless. Obviously, football season is coming up with preseason games. Who do you have your eye on for MVP? Will your favorite player make an over-under on the yards bet for the season? Bet on any option there at DraftKings.com. Best of all, DraftKings is safe, secure, reliable, and you can deposit or withdraw the cash whenever you want. Download DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use promo code THPN. Make your first deposit and get a risk-free bet up to $1,000. That's promo code THPN only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions may apply. See show notes for details.
Little teaser, Randall. There's an article coming tomorrow with DraftKings odds for the Kings. Early days. We're in August, but where the Kings fall and Stanley Cup, Western Conference, odds to win the division, what players are even remotely in consideration or at least on the top 100 potentially for a Hart Trophy. So just a for fun type of thing that's coming tomorrow.
That could be a fun segment going forward, and what over-unders on the props that they have there and what we think that they could get done. That might be something fun to do.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sure.
So let's before we get going into the next topic, CJ coming in here, guys, add super chats featured to the live feeds that we would really like to support. We're figuring all that stuff out, trying to get monetization going. Obviously, we would love all the support that you guys have already given us and additional support coming forward. So I appreciate you wanting to help us out even more, CJ. Really do appreciate that. Coming into this next topic here, between the pipes. Obviously, we've talked about forward expectations, defenseman expectations on a lot of these fringe players, but it's been on a lot of Kings fans' minds and on their fingertips on Twitter, coming in and talking about the goalie situation and really how Cal Petersen hasn't taken that next step, relying on an aging Jonathan Quick, no pipeline available like we just talked about that has separated himself. No person in the pipeline has separated himself. So lots of stuff to talk about. Let's start it out with the big Cal. Obviously gets the big extension, the trustworthy extension that he's going to take that next step. Really didn't last season. Going into his numbers here, he had 20 wins, 14 losses, a 289 goals against average, and an 895 save percentage. So anytime you see something below 9, really a cause for concern. Is this something what did you see from his play last year? And are you kind of upset that he didn't really take that step going forward? I'll start with Joe on this.
It seemed I was a little frustrated. I mean, I'd said at the start of the season, we did like a preseason predictions and, who was going to be the guy. So it's time to give Cal 1A here. He should be given every opportunity to take the reins. It was very inconsistent. I mean, he did show flashes. I mean, I was in the game in Buffalo when he shut out the Sabres, and he played the very next night in Boston. He played great. He had a great stretch of games for about 10 games or so in March, April, I think it was. But it wasn't consistent enough. It wasn't there game in, game out. There were plenty of weak goals it seemed that he gave up. And what's interesting is I look back, Russ, it is to 2020-21 season. In goal save above the expected, he was in the top 20 in that category. He was 38th this year at 5-on-5. High danger chances or high danger save percentage. Prior season, 2020, 2021, he was second in the NHL in high danger save percentage at 5-on-5. This year was 27th. All this to say, I don't know what's actionable there. I don't know what that means exactly. And I guess my take is, yes, I'm disappointed, but no, I have no definitive answer here for you. I can't sit here and tell you and say, it's just a blip. He's going to be fine. Or, look at that. He had a bad year. He's toast. It's a waste, and they trade him, or this is a terrible contract. They should have never done it. Or I don't know, because I think anybody that can accurately predict a goaltender, particularly such an inexperienced one, hasn't played a ton of games. I don't think anybody can. I think especially when you've had two seasons like he's just had that are like not necessarily polar opposites, but he was much better in 2020. He looked the part. He's basically earned the contract, and it was a good bet to buy in on a guy who was a short-term deal. 3 years is not going to kill the Kings in any fashion. Even if he does have another struggle year, it's a shorter deal, so it's not going to be that big of an issue. But long-winded way of saying I don't have a smoking gun as to say, he was really bad in X or he struggled here. I in part because I'm not a goaltending expert, but I'm not worried. Maybe that's crazy. I want to see it again. If he struggles a second year in a row, then I'll be worried. But as of now, I'm going in thinking the last 2 years he's had a good season and a not so good season. Let's see what this one brings.
Yeah, I'm not worried yet. Like, I'm with you. Like, Give me one more season let's see how worried I'll be then if he does struggle. But
sure,
I know a lot of Kings fans are already writing him off. Like, why'd you give him that deal? It is what it is. But you look back at this past season. To start the year, he was not that great. From October to December, he was 5-9 with a save percentage around .895 and a goals against average around 3.2. He didn't really look that good. And then he comes back he was on that COVID stint. And then he comes back in January and February, and he went 9-2. And he had really good numbers. Like you mentioned, he had that shutout in Buffalo, played the next game in Boston. It was looking really good. And then he just kind of ended the season a little bit faltery. I mean, Jonathan Quick was looking really good and started taking the reins a little bit more. But that's kind of what you were hoping Cal Petersen would do. I remember, I think Todd McClellan said like a perfect quote. It was like, Jonathan Quick, as much as Cal Petersen wants to take the keys to the castle, Jonathan Quick's not going to let him. So, yeah, Jonathan Quick, I mean, he's looked pretty good this year. I mean, he looked really good this past year. So for Cal Petersen, you want him to take those keys to the castle and want him to take that starting goalie spot. But with the way Jonathan Quick has played, especially in the playoffs and toward the end of the year last year, you don't really see that happening, at least to start the year. So for Cal Petersen this year, I don't think there's a debate about which player has the most to prove this season. It's easily Cal Petersen. I mean, you have a player who has a 3-year, $15 million deal kicking in this season and really hasn't lived up or played up to possibly that type of deal yet. There's been spurts where he's looked really good, like I just mentioned. He had that spurt from January, February where he looked really strong, but I don't know. It's just, you look at other goalies around the league, like Ville Husso got a 3-year, $15 million deal. I think Shesterkin's getting paid $5 million around that a year. And Jack Campbell got a 5-year, $5 million deal. So that's not to say they should just give up on Cal or they shouldn't have signed him. But, I mean, he's getting paid. So this is the year he's going to have to show us that he's worth that contract.
Yeah, there's a statistic that I saw earlier on all three zones. I know I've brought this site up in the past. What's kind of strange is, and I think he actually had a quality start, 64.5% of his starts were considered quality starts, meaning the amount of goals allowed was fewer than the expected goals based on the difficulty of shots. I don't know. It's like it's a weird season. Like so by that metric, it wasn't that bad. But you did notice he had a couple of just complete blow up starts. He gave up 7 in one. He gave up 6 and I think 2 others. He's gave up 5 a couple times. But I mentioned that stretch in March. I think he had like 10 games, and I think 7 of them were 2 or less. He had a shutout in there. Then he had 1 that was 6. So it's like there was a consistency thing with him. Again, I don't, like I said, I don't have a smoking gun here. I don't know what it is with Cal, but hopefully we'll learn a lot more this year.
It's almost like Gabe Velarde too. We like a player that we've seen that flash of elite level talent, but then there's that like downward trend sometimes where he'll just go be unnoticeable. And with Cal, I mean, I don't know what game it was, but there was one game where it was just right off the start of the game. I think less than 2 minutes in, he gave up a goal right next to him on the left side toward the end of the season. And you see all these great saves. And Cal Peterson he's not the athletic goalie that Jonathan Quick is, but he's a real solid positional goalie who squares up to the puck. And for some reason, there were times where he just wasn't doing that. There was just letting in these kind of fluky goals. And yeah, he was having games where he would give up like 6 or 7 goals a game, and then Jonathan Quick would come in, and then he'd only give up like 2 or 3. So it's hard to judge what Cal's been in terms of being a goaltender in the NHL so far.
I think, and too, when you look at between the two goalies, Quick and Cal, of goalies that played 20 games, if I recall now, I think I wrote this down correctly, Quick was number 1 in low danger save percentage. Cal was 44th in the NHL in low danger save percentage. It's like just giving up odd, weak goals. Yeah. And the year before, he was 29th. Maybe not elite by any means, but at least in that kind of, he's an NHL starting goalie, right? If you go by number of teams. But there was, for whatever reason, he struggled this year. And again, I can't put my finger on it, but that said, I'm not making a definitive stance here, Randon. So if you're looking for me to say Cal's the guy and I'm hitching my wagon to him, or I'm done with Cal, I'm somewhere in between. Sorry.
That's what everybody likes. You have to have a stand, and then you have to get beat up by your stand, and then there's receipts, and so and all that kind of stuff.
My stand is patience, but that's not necessarily
your stand is patience with almost anything nowadays. That's the deflector stand right there. I think it's for me it is. It's like, yeah, you're right. Like the person who has the most to prove is the guy without the 2 Stanley Cups, right? So it's his job to win, and glass ball going down. Like, okay, what if he isn't that guy? And then we're lopped into $5 million, and then we have to go out and get another goalie that's $5 million. Then you have $10+ million tied into the goalie room when you should be using that money to pay the prospects, their second contract. It could lead to some cap casualty that we going down the line that could be detrimental to building this team into a legit contender. If that doesn't take that second step, like, is Cal ever going to be a guy that's like Markstrom that's starting 80% of the games in the season? Well, he hasn't shown that at all. Like, he hasn't been given that opportunity either, but opportunities are also earned. They're not just given. And T-Mac makes you earn every inch on this team for every other player. So why is the goalie position any different?
He was given the chance. Yeah, he just, as Russ said early in the season, like, it's not like he didn't get games to show it. He just didn't do it.
Yeah. So that's the only thing that's interesting for me is this season. I'm not too worried, right? Because we have both of them. You can still do the 50-50 split. But the thing that's about that this whole conversation is going to be wrapped around is what is the future for the LA Kings in between the pipes and the season as a whole. And I think Cal is going to play a huge part into the season, and obviously based on the contract, the future. And what does that look like? Because we're in the beginning of this contention period for the Kings on where they should be contending for playoff spots or more every single year. And how, are we going to be able to consistently do that with a goalie that's been subpar?
Yeah, the hope, I guess, is that the Kings prospects and all the talented, skilled forward prospects that they have, and all the skilled offensive defenseman prospects that they have, you're kind of hoping that they're building into like what the Colorado Avalanche are, where you're scoring enough. You're scoring 4 or 5 goals a game where you don't really need that elite goaltending. I mean, they just won a Stanley Cup with Darcy Kemper, who's not. I mean, no disrespect to Kemper, but he's not like a Shesterkin or Vasilevsky. I mean, we saw what he was in LA. He's a pretty decent, above average goaltender. So, I mean, if Cal can be just that, I think that's good. I'm not saying that's great. I don't think that's enough for 3 years at $5 million a year, but I mean, just being above average goalie. And I think the best thing with Cal right now is that this past year was his worst year of his career. So hopefully he can just reset, come back into the season, and just play solid goaltending like he was the years prior, like you mentioned in that 2021 season. So I know the potential's there. I mean, we saw him. He was elected the best goaltender at the World Championships a couple of years ago. So there's potential, obviously. And if he can just keep up and stay consistent, I think there's a chance that he can be a legit number one in the NHL.
It wouldn't be surprising to see a goalie. And I know he's not young, right? He's not 23 years old anymore. He's 26, 27, going to 28-year-old goaltender. So, but again, you've seen goalies that are late bloomers. I look at Elvis Merzlikins and Columbus, kind of came out of nowhere as a 27-year-old, and he's turned into a pretty solid goaltender. We've seen flashes from Cal. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if he had a big season this year. I echo your concerns and sentiments, Rando, that it kind of has to happen. Otherwise, there could be some potential issues. But I look at the season that Jack Campbell had. I mean, can he have a Jack Campbell type of season where for half the season he was great and then kind of shaky a bit? He was an all-star, Jack Campbell, and I think he could do what Jack Campbell did last year and have a overall fine season at the end of the day. But maybe if you're a Leafs fan, you had other thoughts. But
yeah, I think it's just something that you look at.
Goalies are tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's just something that you look at. I mean, right on here on the NHL statistics, Spencer Knight, right? He backup goalie to Bobrovsky, but he playing with Florida, who's a dynamite team. But he had a 908 and 279, both numbers better than Cal Peterson. And
that's not good though.
That's not good. That's good for Spencer. But that's not good for Cal.
No, but it's not good for either of them. Like, it's not good. So that's the other thing too. Is like,
but Spencer's 20 years old. Like, and he's or 21 years old. Like, that's for him to be a backup and putting up those kind of backup numbers. That's pretty decent for a team. In Florida, like, you're expecting better from a guy that you paid $5 million to. Is what I'm getting at.
Sure, and you are, but I guess my point is, like, I know everybody has like Spencer Knight, and they're talking about he's in the NHL, he's Spencer Knight, but he's not off to a good start. Like, that doesn't mean he's gonna be a bad goalie, but it's like the goalies are very tough to predict and tough to project. I mean, there's no guarantee that Spencer Knight has a good year this year, or Carter Hart, who's had some hiccups in his early part of his career. Two goalies that are highly touted, high prospects. It just takes these kids some time. And though Cal is a little older, he still doesn't have a ton of NHL experience. So I'm just not ready to write him off. I fully acknowledge and understand the concern and the hesitancy heading into the season, but to think that anybody has an answer on a goaltender, I think is kind of crazy.
So going into the next guy, the quick man himself, started 46 games for the Kings, 910 save percentage, 2.59 GAA. For a portion of the season, it looked like we were getting vintage quickie, where he was just competing every single game, all these acrobatic saves, and we're like, okay, well, does he have that one stretch that can take us into the playoffs? And then in the playoffs, can he get hot again? And I thought that he had a couple games in the playoffs where he played very well. I mean, as much as you can against the high-powered offense of Edmonton. But overall, I mean, maybe it all comes down to how we view these seasons. Obviously, Cal didn't have a great season, but based on expectations going into the season, my expectation for Quick was for him to be a serviceable backup. And he gave us that and exceeded those expectations, where the other way around, Cal fell quite short of, I think, what most people expected him to do. And so I don't know, does that tilt the lens for you in any way, Russell, about how his season went based on your expectations going in to the previous season?
Not really. I mean, with Quick, I think we all kind of expected it to be a 50-50 split with the hope that Cal Peterson would eventually take over. It is a little disappointing that, I guess, that Quickie played all playoff games. I don't know. I was just kind of hoping that Cal would get at least some game. I understand that there was a little bit more emphasis with it being Dustin Brown's like last ride. So Jonathan Quick's obviously, and he's got the pedigree with his cups, and he's got the experience. So I understand all that. But I mean, with Quick, yeah, just going back to him in his regular season, I thought he looked really good. I mean, considering his age, he's going to be 37 going into the season in January. So, I mean, there aren't really that many goaltenders that exceed past the age 36, 35. So, I mean, I don't expect Quick to be the next Dominic Hasek where he's going to stick around. But I mean, you just think about the player that he is, and this past season that he is, that the mentality that he's always had. I mean, he's one of the most competitive guys probably on the team, or one of the most competitive guys in the NHL. So, I mean, with the way he played, where he was 6th in the NHL in goals saved above expected per 60. So, some really good starts for him and some really good games in net. So, I don't know if this is his last year. But for this year, you hope that Cal Peterson is eventually going to take the reins. But if Quick puts up another year like he did last season, I don't know. You're going to probably see Quick play another 45, 50-plus games again. So it's a big question mark in that for LA going into this year.
It is. I mean, and you're right. I mean, Quick, you look under the hood at some of the numbers, and you mentioned the goal saves against above expected per 60. He was first, like I said, at 5-on-5 low danger, save percentage, second in high danger, third in 5-on-5 goal saved above expected save percentage. Like it was a really good season for Jonathan Quick. I think, and I probably said the same thing before last season, and he, proved me wrong, made me look like an idiot. So if he does it again, full marks to him. But I think it'd be, you're playing with fire as a goalie that gets older, any player that gets older. I mean, Father Time is undefeated. So at some point, you're going to see these numbers start to tail off a bit. So, Russ, like you said earlier, this is just a massive season. There's a ton of pressure, in my opinion, on Cal Petersen, because it's just not realistic to expect Quick to keep playing like this. Now, if he does, awesome. Would any of us be surprised if he does? No. Because we've seen this mentality in Quick for his entire career, and he loves proving people wrong. But again, as he gets older, this is bound to happen, and especially an athletic goalie like this, right? He's not one of these really sound, quiet, technical goalies who limits his movements and is very positionally sound. That maybe you could see them being a bit more as they age, a little bit more gracefully. He's such an athletic goalie, but he's kept himself in great shape. But it would be unfair to expect him to be, among the top 5 or 10 in these categories that we're rattling off here, Russ. So a ton of pressure on Cal to kind of lessen some of that load. I think it has to be much more of a Cal Petersen. He's got to get more ice time this year. He's got to get more games, if anything, just because Quick, I'm anticipating a little bit of regression. And again, you want to try to keep him as fresh as possible as well down the stretch.
I think the most impressive thing with Quick and with how well he performed this past year is that he didn't really have that great of a defense playing in front of him. Look at all the injuries, all the players that were coming in and out of the defensive lineup. So it's not like he had this like studly defense just stopping. And I know the Kings were one of the best Corsi teams in the NHL, but I mean, you have a lot of young defensemen that were getting games. So to have Quick put up the type of numbers that he did throughout the year with the team playing in front of him, that's even more impressive to think about that.
Yeah, I think it's something to take a look at going forward. And the competitor that he is, like you said, he's not going to give up the keys that quickly. He's going to continue to fight and battle. Whether he'll want to play beyond this season, that'll be for next offseason to discuss. But, going into here, I mean, I assume that he will be the one coming out of camp. And it'll be up to Cal Petersen to take the most of his starts. He has to dominate when he starts to earn that trust to get more and more games. Hopefully the health, like last year for both goalies, is relatively high. So we're not worried about, who's the third man up, like we talked about a couple podcasts ago. I think relatively, we're going to see something pretty similar to last season. And hopefully Cal's numbers are better, to where then you have 2 goalies that are at that high level. I mean, in an ideal season, what does an ideal season look like to you from between the pipes? Like game split, and as far as that goes, like ideally, what does that look for you?
I'd like to see ideally a 65-35 in favor of Cal, which that means Cal he's earned it, right? I'm not just saying give it to him, but if he earns that and he starts to play that well, now you've got Quick, who you can keep a little bit more fresh, and he can be a little bit more ready as in, when he's called upon in a pinch. And the other thing too is like your Kings, if we do think it's reasonable to expect Quick to kind of regress a little bit and come back to the pack from where he had those great numbers from last season. If Cal stays where he was, the Kings are in a lot of trouble because we talked about how tight this division should be. There's no guarantee that the playoffs aren't just going to be handed to them. So they're going to really need Cal Petersen to play a lot of games. Now, in my opinion, a best case scenario is Cal's getting 65% of the games because he's earning it and he's playing well. And if he is, then the Kings should be in pretty good shape between the bites.
65% puts him at 53 games started, which would have been 14th with Igor Shesterkin at 53 games started. The number one in the league last year was UC Soros at 67. So, yeah, I mean, that would be a pretty big ask.
Yeah, I think 50 games would be my benchmark for what I hope Cal Petersen would start and then give Quick the other 32. I think that's a really good split in terms of hopefully Cal is playing at an elite level, or I guess just starter level to warrant getting those 50 games. But I also, it's funny because I wonder if Jonathan Quick almost saved a lot of the criticism Cal would have got just by his good season last year. I mean, what if Jonathan Quick didn't have a good season and Cal Petersen had the season he had? We'd probably be a lot more critical on Cal than we are right now. I mean,
they would have missed the playoffs.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's not that, I guess, savior in terms of Quick for Cal Petersen's like lack of or weak effort, or not weak effort, but you know what I mean. So yeah, poor performance. So it's if Quick didn't have that year, we'd probably be a lot more critical on Cal Petersen and be a lot more worried, I guess, going into this year. Because right now, if you ask me who the starter is for opening night, I'm saying Jonathan Quick. I'm not saying Cal Petersen. Yeah. I mean, obviously we have training camp. It's still really early, but with the way that the two ended the season, you have to expect Quick is getting the nod.
Yeah, and I think the fact that he played so well kind of it gives a little reassurance, I guess you could say, to us as fans is like, okay, at least there's still, like you said, that safety net that weren't sure how long this was going to be there, but it's still there right now. So enjoy it while it's here, but at some point, Cal's going to take it and run.
Do you guys think that this job can be won out of camp? Or do you think, like you said, it's going to be given to Quick to start and he has to win it in real time?
I think he's got to win it in the season. I mean, it'd take a hell of a freaking camp because, I mean, they're going to want to see both goalies. They're going to want to get both goalies at least a little bit of time. I just don't think there's going to be enough game action for Cal to grab it and run with it. I don't think so.
Yeah, that would be a difficult decision because I don't know. Coming off of last year, you're if Cal Petersen is getting the start or the starting goaltender, I guess, coming into the season, that would mean that Quick just had a terrible camp, which I don't really expect to happen. I mean, you would suspect that Quick would have both goalies. I mean, you go into training camp and these preseason games, they're kind of just really warm-up games mostly. I mean, there's some training camp battles for positional spots, but I mean, you look at the goaltending situation, it's not like there's a rookie goaltender who's contending for one of the 1-2 spots in net. I mean, the two goalies are set already for LA, so it's going to be Quick or Petersen. And with like I talked about with how last year ended, you got to suspect that Quick is going to be the number one.
Cool. Let's switch it over here to a segment of Making It Rain. It's time to get under the umbrella of the Ontario Reign here and see what we got going on. Pretty vast goalie room. The depth has been a concern for most people. 6 people in between the pipes played last year for the Ontario Reign. You had Matty Villalta with the lion's share of 46 games played. Sparks had 12. And then you had Lucas Parikh, Jacob Ingham, John Letherman, and David Hrenak all start 5 or less games for the Reign here. Let's start from the back and work up to Villalta. Out of those 4 that really got 5 or less, from the statistics, you're looking at David Hrenak with the 181 goals against, had that shutout, had a good college career, 951 save, whereas Parikh and Ingham both had 860 to 880 save percentages there. So they had a rough time in between the pipes where Hrenek came in and had that stability, even though he only played for 4 games. Joe, obviously, with you and I doing most of the work for Making the Rain last season, who were you most impressed with, and why is it David Hrenek?
Well, I will, put the umbrella here and say, listen, this is all small sample. Like, I'm not going to read too much into any of the AHL action that we saw. That said, the goalie I was most impressed with is David Hrenek. And the other thing to keep in mind, I mentioned this earlier, that guys, it just takes goalies more time. Like, you look at the age of Ingham is 22 years old. Parikh is 21, I think he is. I don't think he's even 22 yet. Hrenek is 24 years old. He's a little bit more polished. He had 5 years of Division I hockey. He played 33 games in the USHL. So he's got a little bit more under his belt. So it's not surprising to see at 24 years old him be a little bit more polished, I'll say.
Parikh is 21.
Okay. So 3 years. That's a big deal, especially for a young goaltender. So of the group, Hrenek is who I'm really, really interested in this season. Again,
are you surprised by that because of 5 years at college? Like, he has had more time and more shots against. Like, you were surprised by that?
Surprised by
him being the most established as far as.
No, I would expect it. Again, I mean, because I think he's a little bit older, and again, I think it takes goalies. It's going to take them more and more time, especially as a goalie adjusting levels. He went from he was in the USHL, played, got his feet wet, and then really established himself in college. So the transition to Ontario went well early days, but I would say that I just really like where he's at right now as a 24-year-old, and I think he's somebody that my eyes are going to be very much on this season, because I will push back on the depth piece of the Kings goaltending system. There is depth. People can question the quality, and if there's like a legit prospect in here, that's fair. But between Villalta, Hrenek, Parikh, Ingham, and Markkanen, there's a handful of goalies here that at least we'll see what happens. You throw enough darts, maybe you hit one. And I think that's what they're going for. And Hrenek could be one that they hit. I mean, he was was he a 5th round pick? He was a relatively late pick, if I'm not mistaken, a few years back.
5th round, yeah.
Yeah, 5th round in 2018.
And the other thing, too, he's 6'2". He's not a small goalie. He's not one of these giants. But I just think that he's the one for me that going into the season that I'm most optimistic on.
Yeah, there's this traffic jam developing down in Ontario in the goaltending position. You look at all those netminders down there with Hrenek. You have Villalta, who's been there. You have Parikh, who's in the ECHL. You have Ingham, too. It's just – that's funny. But, yeah, Hrenek kind of came out of nowhere and really stepped in and played really good in the regular season. He got shelled a little bit in the playoff game. I think he played 1 or 2 games.
No, he played. Villalta played and Sparks played. I don't think he got a playoff game.
Okay, yeah, okay. And then this season should be interesting in terms of the young goaltenders for Ontario, in terms of how they split it. Who they really – I would love to know who they really kind of have as far as being the next one to make the jump in case there is an injury in the NHL roster. Who would be that next player that they call on, the first player that they call on? But, I mean, right now maybe it is David Hrenek, just based off of his experience in the college ranks, and then his age right now, like you mentioned, at 24. So he's on the older age in terms of just comparing them to the other netminders down there. But I thought he looked pretty good in his first couple of games in the AHL.
You were right. He came in in relief, and he got shelled in relief. Yeah,
didn't go well. But so yeah, he's an interesting one for me, and I agree, Russ, and that's part of the reason why, I get it. I think we talked about it when they did the signing. Like, I can understand the signing of Phoenix Copley, but boy, like, I'd really hope that David Hrenek and these guys are going to get a chance to play. Now, all that said, like, I kind of expect Parikh will probably play in the ECHL. Ingham will probably play a lot in the ECHL. Markkanen's overseas. He's going to be playing in Germany. So some of these guys, I'm probably going to get their time, right, at those levels. But in the AHL, you have Villalta and Hrenek, and I'd rather see. My preference was to see those two guys go and see how that goes. But
I think the most interesting one this season is definitely Hrenek. The one to keep the eye on the most is probably Parikh, and the reason being is that he's a 3rd-round pick, right? They invested a higher asset into him. He's playing a lot of pro games, whether it's the USHL or whatever. Still young, 21, and Yannetti's saying most goalies need draft year plus 5, 6, or 7 to be relevant in the NHL, and so draft year would have been 18, so he's draft year plus 3 right now, so he's definitely something that has got to be looked at. But so that's where I'm at, because his draft capital is a lot higher than an Ingham is a 6th-round pick. Markin, I believe, was a 4th-round pick. So you have a lot of these guys that are later rounds. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean high draft capital means success, but your expectation is definitely weighed upon where you were drafted.
Yeah, I mean, again, you have a 21-year-old. He's 6'4". We talked about size and players adapting to size. He's a big goalie that's adapting to that, and in a crucial position, and he's going to be jumping around from various levels. So again, I think I agree, Brandon. So my opinion, and I said earlier, I'm not any sort of goalie expert, so I won't pretend to be. But if I had to rank these 5, Hrenek is my favorite right now. Parikh is my 2. Although Ingham is probably pretty close to Parikh. Maybe they can be interchangeable by the end of the year. That's kind of my top 3 in terms of the prospects that they do have. So I am intrigued in Parikh. When there were some games he looked pretty good. Again, much more of the quiet technical side of things than the overly athletic, I would say. But a lot to like, I think, about Lukas Parikh. But again, 21 years old. Let's understand that he's at least a couple of years away.
I mean, the one that
I'm making a determination. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm actually pretty excited about Parikh, and he's got a lot more fanfare, I guess, than some of the other goalies in the system. He had a game, I believe, in the World Juniors with Czechia now. Yeah. So he looks really good in that game. I forget who they were playing, but yeah. So he's got that kind of win steal ability, I guess, that's a word. So. Yeah, but the goalie I want to see, I think is probably next in line, is Matt Villalta, and the reason I say that is that I thought he's put in the work in Ontario. This will be his 3rd. I'm looking at his stats right now. This will be his 4th year with the Reign, and 2 years ago, he was looking rough. Him and Sean Dursey were both kind of they were having these mental lapses. What are you doing? How are you letting that puck by you? It's just you were kind of watching him what is going on? And then this past year, with the way Sean Dursey started in Ontario and the season that Villalta had, I thought they had huge improvements. I mean, granted, it's a much better team in Ontario with Tynan coming in. Frick was there. You had a lot more talent there. But I want to see what Villalta can do in the NHL. And the thing that I found, I might be totally late to this, but I brought this up to Joe and Ryan earlier today, that Villalta and Jonathan Quick were both drafted 72nd overall in their respective drafts. So, yeah, we put a lot of thought on draft capital or where goalies are drafted. But, yeah, sometimes you find these diamonds in the rough in the later mid rounds, and that's what Kings have done. I mean, you look at, go back to Martin Jones. He wasn't even drafted, and he turned out to be a pretty decent goalie in the NHL. So I just you just kind of hope that these goaltenders get their feet wet and get a taste of the NHL game and see what they can do, because you never know. I mean, maybe they step in and they all of a sudden can be this perennial number 1 netminder. So with Villalta, I think he's put in the time, and I think he's due for a chance to prove some people wrong.
I'm a little torn on this because he's by all accounts, he's a great kid. We had him on the show on Making It Rain. He was a fantastic kid to talk to. I'm absolutely rooting for him. I don't want to see him fail. But yes, he has put in the work. I agree. The work it hasn't been good. I don't know that we can necessarily just say that he should get it because he's kind of put the work in. I mean, I understand that concept, but I mean, it's a sub 900 save percentage in the AHL. And he didn't have big numbers as in the OHL either during when he, before he was drafted. So I'm skeptical. And that said, I do think it's a big year for him. He's 23 years old. So again, not writing him off, but I really hope we see a bigger step this year. There were times, Russ, last year, man, like this is the Villalta that we want to see. There would be 10, 15 game stretches where like, okay, it's here. But we talked about the steal ability. You mentioned it, and we'll make it a word for today's show.
Like it.
No, I don't know that I see that in Villalta, right? I think he was more, he almost was as if it was like the Grant Fuhr of the old Edmonton Oilers. You had that powerhouse Ontario Reign team that was going to score a ton of goals, and we're just going to outscore you, and good luck, Matty V. And for the most part, he made the saves to keep them in some games. Again, there were games where he did play very, very well, but not nearly consistent enough. And that was my frustration, where just when it looked like, okay, especially the start of the season, like this kid's, here we go. This is going to be a much better season from Villalta. And it just, at the end of the day, is it an improvement? Yes. But it's still very meh, if you will. So I really hope that he has a big start to the season, and if and when the Kings do need a call up, they can go to him. But it's hard to say that he's earned it from a not disputing his work ethic, his attitude, none of that, obviously, but just from an on-ice performance, it's just not quite been there, right? Honestly, It really hasn't. So, and you mentioned Quick, and you're right, like, because at the time, remember, that was Jonathan Bernier's job. Quick came out of nowhere, but Quick did have good seasons in the AHL with Manchester. I mean, he put up, 920 save percentages in decent chunks of games that we just haven't seen it from Villalta yet.
It's weird because, Cal Peterson or Matt Villalta had better numbers than Cal Peterson in Cal's last year in the AHL. We're talking about two totally different teams. The Reign are much better now. But
Cal was getting like 60 shots a game. He was averaging.
Yeah, he was being shelled quite a bit because I remember those teams. They were just not that good. But it's just, I don't know. With Matt Villalta, I saw a lot of improvement in his game, and maybe it is. We just have to wait and see what he does in the AHL this year, because I think this, like you said, it's a big year for him. If he shows a little bit more improvement, I think that'll be huge for not only his mindset, but also for the Kings organization as a whole, because now you have another goalie who looks like he's slowly improving, who's going to maybe kind of help with that, I don't know, missing of elite goaltending talent, who at least will bring some sort of viability in net for LA.
And the other thing that I'll mention is he just turned 23. Okay, he's not like a 23 turning 24. Like Hrenik's a 24-year-old right now. He just turned 23, and I don't want to overstate, but also I guess I don't want to understate it either. But I want to state it in some fashion. Everybody else can determine what they want. We're stating it. Like, he had 2 seasons. He's going into his 4th season with the Reign, but the first 2 were cut short. Right? They weren't full pro seasons for him. So not only, Rando, you mentioned draft year +5. Not only is he draft year plus, what is it?
He'll be 6 this year.
But 2 of those seasons were chopped in half. Take it that way you will. Is that an excuse? I don't know. But, maybe buy in this. Maybe this is a big, to reiterate the fact that this is such a big year for him, because he kind of lost a season's worth of development in terms of games played. So maybe this is a year where he takes an even bigger step, because I agree there were improvements in his game last year. He was better than the prior year. And if maybe this is a year where we see him take a larger step.
He had more games started last season than the previous 2 seasons combined. So, definitely, like, that's something to be said is, we talked about it in our draft episodes and with all the guys that we had on and talking about a lot of the OHL and Canadian prospects turn it on towards the end of the year because of the COVID issues and being out. And so, that's got to trickle down to other players. And so, I think it's something along those lines that not seeing that many shots. And this is his first full season manning the majority of the work. I mean, it wasn't a 50-50 split by any means. I think Sparks, if I remember correctly, had 12 games. So
this was his team.
So it's going to be something there. I mean, Obviously, I think the lion's share is going to go to Villalta, and it's going to be up to Hrenek to steal more games and get more playing time by his play. But this is a completely different situation. I think easily Villalta will earn or has earned the start of the season chokehold on the starter position.
And so he played 46 games last season. He hadn't played that many since 2018-19 when he was with Sault Ste. Marie in the OHL. So it's been a long time since he's had the workload too. And so another thing to remember is you go from starting 15 games to almost 50. It's a big jump. So again, there may be reasons to why he's kind of just not yet taken that next step. And again, hopefully this is a big one.
I think we're all in agreement here, though, that the Kings don't need to go out and trade for some goaltending prospect right now. So I think we can all agree on that. There's no need to go out and trade for a Spencer Knight or anything like that. You have we've talked about 5 goaltenders that one of them is bound to hit. I mean, I guess maybe I don't have any odds or probabilities, but yeah, I mean, there's some talent that they're going to find. Like we talk about, there's no first or second round pick, high elite talented goaltender in the system, but I mean, you never know with the way these goalies play in these minor league systems and these minor league teams, and one of them is bound to surprise us at some point.
The only thing I wouldn't go like making it a priority. We have to go trade for some prospect goalie. If there's an opportunity that presents itself, I think it's an intriguing one. Cal Peterson, I don't know how often they were interested in going after Cal Peterson, but then when it came that he wasn't going to sign, well, now Cal Peterson becomes interesting. Mm-hmm. You know, if Eric Portillo in Buffalo doesn't sign, they are rich in goaltending prospects. Levy is their stud. They've got $6K. Like if who's been in the AHL for a couple of years now, if there's legitimate concern that Levy isn't going to sign, I'll kick tires on Portillo. That is, I'll kick tires on Portillo. I'm not like opposed to it in the right scenario.
He's he's in the top 20 goalie ranking for prospects.
No question. He's a legitimate prospect. It's just, so I'm not going to go out of my way to do it. But if there's a scenario where you got a situation like that where a player may not sign and you can maybe get him for cheaper than you could have normally, again, I'll kick the tires around. And I think my issue is probably what you're getting at, Russ, is like, we got these guys and it's way too early to write out. If people want to write Villalta off, I'm not going to fight with him on it. He's going to be going, this is his age 23. It's his age 23 season. And we just talked about how goaltenders in the 23, 24, 25-year-old seasons, really that's when we're going to determine whether or not they're ready or they're going to make a jump or not. So, I mean, if people want to write it up because he's had a bad couple of years, that's fine. They can. His numbers speak for themselves, and they're not very good right now. But you got to make sure these guys are getting their reps and they're getting their time too. So when you go out and if you acquire a goalie, Russ, like you're saying, maybe that we should pump the brakes on that. You got to find places for them to play, because you still have guys that you've invested in. You got to figure out where they're at, because anybody that says they know that Lucas Preek is not going to make it, you have no idea. He's 21 years old. You have no idea about Juho Markkinen. You have no idea about any of these guys. I mean, the only one, again, that I won't fight is Villalta, because he's had at least the AHL reps that just haven't been very good. But we talked about, this is a big year. So it's too early on a number of these guys. Ingham, we haven't talked a ton about Jacob Ingham here. He's 22. Mm-hmm. So I guess there I am, Randon, just preaching patience again, and maybe that's wrong of me. Maybe I should just start getting rid of everybody.
We've been so blessed for like 15 years almost without having to worry about any goaltending situation.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I do think, and maybe I'm wrong here, because I was thinking about this briefly earlier and then I didn't get a chance to dig in, but the Kings were spoiled with Jonathan Quick. That isn't necessarily you just mentioned the Avalanche just won a cup with Darcy Kemper, and now he's out the door. And guess who's going to be the favorites to win the cup this year? The Colorado Avalanche. Mm-hmm. And who's their goalie? Georgiev and Frank. Seriously? So let's not get too Vasilevsky, right? He's a stud. I mean, Nashville had Pekka Rinne for years. They didn't end up winning a cup, but the Lundqvist, he never won a cup. But there's these guys that are these franchise goalies. I don't know that that's necessarily the norm. And also, especially nowadays when it comes to salary cap and things like that, I would be much more like, I don't want to pay, I don't know if I want to pay anybody 8 years, but like, give me that 3 year, 5. What I like so much about the Cal Peterson deal is they bought in at a, yes, they bought a little bit high on the number, but 3 years for a kid that's coming off a good season, you could catch him at a really good number at a good time, because a starting goalie is going to make $5 million. That just is what it is. And if they obviously thought he was going to continue to develop into that goalie, but I don't know that. I guess what I'm getting at is I need to stop finding like who's the next decade replacement for Quick.
Yeah,
that's problem number one. Don't look at it like that. Like, we have to find out who is going to be the next starting goalie to take over for Quick in the short term, but it doesn't have to be the guy for the next decade, right? You can still continue to develop and just take it kind of 2-3 years at a time rather than 10 years, because that isn't necessarily the norm.
I think it comes from, right. It just comes from disappointment on a lot of these prospects. I think it comes from what we thought was a stronghold for our team is now a question mark, right? Like, the rest of the team has taken steps forward within their development with the signing of trade for Victor Arvidsson, signing of Danault, now the trade for Kevin Fiala. We're making the playoffs. And a part of the team that we didn't think we had to worry about, the next heir apparent to Jonathan Quick right off into the sunset, we're going to be good, next 5-6 years because, Cal's a little bit older, now is a question mark. And then it shines the spotlight into the prospect pool, right? Because nobody would give an F. If last year Cal Peterson was starting 50 games and was lights out, no one would give a flying F about the goalie depth in Ontario. They would, because he would be the guy. But now that there's a question mark, all of a sudden there's question marks everywhere. And I think it's rightfully deserved, right? There's no standout goalie from what we've seen, because even know that it's not high-end pro hockey, Ingham hasn't been great. Parikh hasn't been great, even with amongst his peers. Now they're both young. It is what it is. But it's not that it's like like you said, we have top prospects everywhere else. It would be nice. And it would make us feel cozy and wrapped in a blanket if we had an Askarov or a Spencer Knight or Sebastian Kosa and, et cetera, et cetera. There wasn't one of those goalies this year. There isn't going to be one of those goalies next year. I haven't done any draft prospect things for 2024, nor do I care to this early. So like in the foreseeable future, right, it's just a bunch of hope. And with the prospect pool, they haven't really given us much. They've only given us hope. They haven't given us any execution, right? So, for a lot of these high-end guys. And so I think that's just kind of where fans are getting at, is one thing that was supposed to be a stalwart part of our progression into the next chapter in Kings history is now a question mark, and that gives people pause.
Yeah, and I get it. I can appreciate the frustration. Especially I'm frustrated too that Cal had kind of he took a step back last year. Of course I am, but that doesn't mean I'm going to take it out on the guys that are in the system, that they're no good or anything like that. Like, remember, none of these guys are very high picks, so they're throwing darts, right? And I think that they've got 5 darts here to play with, and Russ, you said before what the probabilities are. I don't know, but I kind of like the chances. Like, I'm not going to be surprised if one of these guys turns into, I don't know,
goalie.
Yeah, just be a serviceable NHL goalie, and then maybe more. Who knows? Because you've seen goaltenders; it's so unpredictable. There's so few guys these days. Vasilevsky looks like Shesterkin now, and probably I would put Saros in the conversation. And beyond that, like, who are you hanging your hat on? What goaltenders out there are you just so confident in that they're every team probably has some questions. The Cup winners just got rid of their goaltender. Like, I just don't know that it's. I think it's because we were spoiled with what we had for so long with Quick, but that I look at it a little bit different. That I'm okay taking dart throws. I'm okay with that.
For a lot of Kings fans, it's like, yeah, they're spoiled with Quick, but then they think about what happened before Quick. They think about Check Monic. They think about Dan Kluche. That's the problem. Is like, yeah,
what was
like,
the year they started like 13 goalies?
Oh man, yeah. Let's not talk about that. But it's like before Quick, there was nobody, and they couldn't even buy it. They couldn't find a goalie anywhere. So.
Yeah. And then when they got Quick, all their backups were starters elsewhere. They
and then all of a sudden now you had it was just a goaltending factory. You had Bernier shipped out. You had Martin Jones shipped out. Like, okay,
Bishop is here for a cup of coffee.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like Jack Campbell was here, and now look at him. It's like, geez. So I don't know. It's
the unpredictability of the position.
Yeah, it's a bigger conversation, Brandon. Like you've mentioned, like there's been so much hope and all this hype around all these prospects that we've talked about and we continue to talk about. I mean, anytime a prospect ranking pool comes up, it's just the Kings top and like, yeah, Kings have the number one prospect pool. They're going to be like a dynasty in a couple years. And now that we've kind of got to those couple years later down the road, it's like, okay, well, where are these prospects? Because you watch players like Zegras, Moritz Seider, and Lucas Raymond, and all these talented players play pretty well on the NHL level already. And then you're seeing them players like Quentin Byfield and Arthur Callie still kind of get like they're playing really good, but they're still somewhat getting their feet wet. And there's also all the other first round picks: Gabe Vilardi, Turcotte, Bjornfoot, Kupari. I mean, we've probably said this the last couple of years, but this is going to be a huge year for those players. And
this is a huge year for our prospects.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're like they need to make the next step. So, I mean, it is what it is. It's like you have to give Kings fans some sort of a reason to be excited, or I don't know, that these expectation that these prospects are going to live up to the hype. Because, I mean, yeah, Brandon, like, I mean, maybe it is a little bit early to be concerned about it, but yeah, it is a little concerning that there hasn't been that prospect that has just come out from juniors and make us step in the NHL and excelled. There hasn't been that Tim Stützle for the Kings or Trevor Zegras for the Kings. So we're waiting for that. But, I mean, this season I'm expecting a huge year from Quentin Byfield. And I think he's probably one of the biggest X factors in the Kings, along with Arthur Kaliev, because they're going to get every opportunity to excel. And the way that they looked, the way Byfield looked at development camp, and hopefully he comes in with a good training camp and a strong preseason like he did last year and has a good start to the season. And I think they'll be pretty solid throughout the year.
To go back to the goalies for a quick question, because I think you may have even asked Russ that you wish you kind of were in the heads of management to see what they were really thinking with the goaltenders, and if somebody goes down, who are they thinking? Does the Phoenix Copley signing, because we really didn't talk about him, but we can't just he was signed to a contract, and for as of right now is expected to be in Ontario. He's probably there to see some games, because if he doesn't play, he can't be expected to be the guy to come up to be the third goalie, because you'd hope that whoever's coming up is going to play some games. So he's going to play in Ontario, assuming he's there. Does that sort of answer your question that they really don't feel Villalta is ready? Because my take coming into that, like I was on the board with not signing that kind of veteran backup and saying, you know what, Villalta's been here now 3 seasons, although 2 of them kind of abbreviated. This is be his 4th season. He's approaching his age 24 season. His age 23. Let him and Hrenek play this out a little bit, and maybe there's no need to have that kind of AHL vet backup, because again, this would be Villalta's 4th season. Do you think though that the signing of Copley hints at a little lack of confidence that Villalta would be prepared to do so? Not that I have no greater confidence in Phoenix Copley than I do Villalta or Hrenek, frankly. But just throwing it out there, maybe that's a hint that there's a little bit of uncertainty from the organization that either of those are ready.
This is what I think about the Copley signing is, let's say a goaltender does go down and you have to call up a goalie to fill that spot. I think it is going to be Copley, but the reason I think that is because once let's say Copley is in and Cal Peterson is the other goalie, they're not going to be doing a 50-50 split. So, I mean, most likely Copley's just going to be riding the pine, really.
Yeah.
So do you want to have a player like Matt Villalta be called up just to kind of be the backup and just sit around and watch the play, or do you want to have him playing AHL games? So It's kind of what we saw a little bit with Garrett Sparks. He didn't really play that much in the AHL. I think he was injured a little bit, but I mean, when there was a spot for someone to play or goaltender to play in the NHL, that he was the first one called. So let's say hypothetically that both goaltenders go down. I think it is Villalta or Hrenik that gets called up to be the starter for 10 plus games or so. But in a small run, let's say you're in a pinch on a back-to-back, Phoenix Copley is probably going to be the guy, but you want to have these young goaltenders playing games, and you can't have them just sitting there watching. So they'll have to find ways. They'll have to loan out. I think Ingham was playing at the Swamp Rabbits in Greenville, and then Parikh, I think, is in Rapid City. So you just want to have these goaltenders see as many pucks as they can. So the Copley signing, I'm not really that, I guess, disappointed by it. I think it's just more about a filler spot that the Kings have NHL goaltender experience. So
yeah, I think it's going to be something to look at. And it's uncertain. And I think that the Yannetti saying that they went up and tried to go get Wallstat was something there. I also think if you hear him talk about the tiers in the way he drafts, Wallstat was in a high tier in a top 10 tier for most people, and he fell 10 to 12 picks, but depending on which draft board you look at, okay, that's an elite player that's falling down the draft. We need to make every effort to go get him. And whether that would have been for a defender or a forward of the same ilk, who knows? But he was open about that. It's going to be something to see. It's going to be definitely interesting on how the season works out and where these goalies progress and how the future works out. And hopefully, we're not hoping anymore and we get some actual results, because patience is a virtue, and no girl can say I'm not patient enough. I dealt with the Kings prospect pool. So with that being said, and great episode, guys. As always, you can find constant articles being written. Nice plug on an article coming out tomorrow about the draft bets at hockeyroyalty.com. Our Twitter handles are flying across the bottom there, but if you're listening in your car, it's at JW Paterino, at NHL Russell, at Rando Commando 24, and at hockey_royalty. Please add us after you're off the 5 freeway and not going 80 miles an hour under the safety of your own home. And as always, go Kings, go, fellas.
Go Kings.